Hi guys, I'm just another guy named James, and today I'm going to be talking about the next set of G.I. Joe comics. And the set of issues we're talking about today was released in 1989, and I think it's a really interesting set of comics. It's these 3 issues right here, plus another one that I don't like the cover of nearly as much as these. So it's these 3 issues. They're written all by Larry Hama, because he's the series writer for G.I. Joe. So most every issue of this series is written by Hama. But these issues are written by Larry Hama, and they're drawn by, at least these 2 and the first one, they're all drawn by Mark Bright. Now, the name Mark Bright might be familiar to you, especially if you're an Iron Man fan, which, I don't know if you know this, but I am. So Mark Bright is one of the few artists on G.I. Joe who did like superhero work for Marvel. He did the Iron Man story Armor Wars, as well as a bunch of other Iron Man comics around that era. He's a really strong artist, and you really see how good of an artist he is compared to the guy who did the other issue in this run, this issue, Tony Salmons. Now, Salmons just isn't a very good artist. He's not very good at drawing faces. I don't think his angles are good. His poses tend to be pretty non-dynamic. Overall, he's just not a favorite artist of mine. And especially when you're comparing it in the same sequence to Mark Bright's artwork, because Bright is a favorite artist of mine. And there's a lot of ground to cover in these issues. There's Cobra leadership restructuring. There's Joe's being captured and brought to prison. There's ninja action. There's just a lot going on. So let's hop into our story, which opens on the Dreadnoks swimming in a pool full of cash in Broca Beach. We then see Zorana, the kind of leader of the Dreadnoks, walking away from the rest of the crew to take a stroll through the town, where we see that the citizens of Cobra are very happy to be off of Cobra Island. We then cut to Rock and Roll and Clutch, who are 2 members of the G.I. Joe team, 2 of the first members of the G.I. Joe team actually, and they're on vacation, and they're driving around because Clutch is trying to show Rock and Roll around the town, but that town has been transformed into Broca Beach. Clutch and Rock and Roll then try to get to the boardwalk, but it's been closed off. And before they get a good chance to investigate, a police officer confronts them. And as the officer talks to the Joes, Rock and Roll notices that the cop is wearing a Cobra signet ring, so he pushes Clutch back in the car. Back with the Dreadnoks, we see that they've caught a glimpse of the Joes and that they've recognized them. So as the Joes drive away, Road Pig, one of the Dreadnoks, the big muscle-bound guy, sounds the alarm, and all of Broca Beach rolls out after the Joes. And as the Joes fly down the highway, they try to find their radio as they dodge bullets. Eventually, the Joes find their radio and call in to General Hawk, who sends the Mean Dog, a new heavy armor vehicle, to go pull Rock and Roll and Clutch out of the fire. We then see that just as Clutch and Rock and Roll have run into some highly powered Cobra armor, the Mean Dog arrives on scene, and Clutch and Rock and Roll out as the Mean Dog takes on Cobra. We then see Rock and Roll and Clutch zooming down the highway as the Cobra cops chase them down, but they're eventually able to zip around to the other side of the battlefield. We then see the Mean Dog absolutely piece up the Cobras, but in the process, the Mean Dog gets rocked, specifically its transmission. Back on the highway, we see Rock and Roll and Clutch run into Road Pig, who captures them. About a week later, we see Cobra. We see Destro has called a meeting of the senior Cobra officials. So Zorana, Baroness, Dr. Mindbender, 2 random guys whose name I can't remember, but basically just all the Cobra senior leadership. And he sets up a series of checks and balances to try to keep everyone from betraying each other, setting up his people, people from the Destro organization with the Cobra organization. And as part of these checks and balances, Zorana and Baroness have to start working together, even though they hate each other. We then cut away to Storm Shadow's now abandoned dojo, where we see that someone who is able to change his appearance at will is trying to investigate Storm Shadow's whereabouts. Back in Broca Beach, we see Baroness and Zorana go down to their dungeons, where we see the pair hook Clutch and Rock and Roll into the brainwave scanner. At the Presidio, the current G.I. Joe headquarters, we see that the same shapeshifter from earlier is trying to infiltrate the Presidio. But the Joes immediately figure out that Zartan is just trying to track down Storm Shadow as part of their blood feud. They have a blood feud because Storm Shadow killed Zartan killed Storm Shadow's uncle at an earlier date in the story. So the Joes confront Zartan, but Zartan is able to slip away. Before he's confronted and called out by the Blind Master. And if you don't remember who the Blind Master is, I don't blame you. I was really struggling to remember him as well. The last time we saw him was in the Barovia arc, where Stalker and a bunch of Joes get captured. He worked with the ninjas in that story. That's the last time. But that was almost 30 issues ago, and that was the last time he appeared in the G.I. Joe comic. So yeah, the two of them, Zartan and the Blind Master, go into an alley to settle their differences, to beat each other up, and try to kill each other over the death of the Hard Master. We then cut to a forest nearby, where we see that Storm Shadow, Jinx, Scarlet, and Snake Eyes are sitting at a fire trying to lay low, but they're shot at by some red ninjas, so Storm Shadow runs off into the woods to find the attackers. We then cut back to Zartan and the Blind Master, who are fighting in an alleyway, before we jump to Broca Beach, where we see Zorana and Baroness and the Dreadnoks are using the brainwave scanner on Clutch, destroying his memories as a form of torture before they start putting in new memories of Clutch being a Cobra agent. Out in the woods, we see Storm Shadow has found the leader of the Red Ninja and is having a solo confrontation with him. At the campsite, we see Scarlet, Snake Eyes, and Jinx get surrounded by ninjas. Back with Storm Shadow, the fight goes on, and it's revealed that the Red Ninja used to be part of the same ninja clan as Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes. But they revolted because Storm Shadow let in an outsider, the outsider being Snake Eyes, into their clan. Back at the campsite, Scarlet and Jinx get taken down by the Red Ninja, but Snake Eyes is able to stay in the fight and take down the rest of the ninja. Back at the waterfall, Storm Shadow is losing the fight, but he's able to just barely keep going before the pair end up fighting in the river. We then cut away to the Blind Master, who is about to kill Zartan, but one of his students reminds him that revenge is bad. So the Blind Master drops the knife. So Zartan picks it up and stabs the Blind Master, because Zartan's got no issue killing people. Out in the woods, we see Snake Eyes and crew pull Storm Shadow out of the river that he is floating down half alive. We then see the Blind Master reunite with his student, but we also see that it's not actually the Blind Master, it's Zartan impersonating him. We then cut again to Zorana and Baroness, who are getting into a heated argument, butting heads and fist fighting, but they eventually come around and start working together. We then see them finish reprogramming Clutch and Rock and Roll. As Zorana and the Dreadnoks start driving the Joes away from the Cobra Consulate building, we see Baroness calling in a tip to the Joes, letting them know the Dreadnoks' whereabouts and that they have Clutch and Rock and Roll as hostages. We then see Flint, Lady J, and Roadblock roll up on the Dreadnoks before a quick firefight that the Joes win pretty easily. Eventually, the Dreadnoks try to slip away with Rock and Roll and Clutch still in their van, but Baroness just simply blows up the van. We see that the Joes are able to recover Rock and Roll and Clutch, and some of the Dreadnoks even from the fiery crash. And for today, that's where our story is going to end, because this run of the comic, these yeah, these four issues that I kind of touched on. There's a lot going on in them, but a lot of this stuff is just kind of like seeding storylines that don't fulfill until after the next story arc. The next story arc being the Snake Eyes trilogy, which is notably one of the only, I believe actually, the only G.I. Joe story to ever get a house ad. But that's a topic for next time. But anyway, so this story is kind of interesting to me. Because, yeah, like I said, it's a lot of setup. And there's kind of a lot going on. So the biggest thing, the most interesting part of this whole thing to me, and I remember really liking these issues when I was a kid. I remember thinking they were super interesting. Having Clutch and Rock and Roll get brainwashed, and then freed, it feels like a happy ending, but then you have to remember they're still brainwashed. They're still programmed to at some point betray the Joes. So that's kind of something that's going to be that's cooking in the background for the next few issues. And I just think it's an interesting story idea. But yeah, there's a lot that goes on in this story. It's another Dreadnought story that makes you wonder how are the Dreadnoughts alive? Like the Joes just don't kill anyone. I understand that it's a comic book, and especially at this time in comic books, characters didn't really die. But again, these are military experts fighting a biker gang. Come on now. They should not be, the Dreadnoughts should not still be a threat to the Joes at this point in the G.I. Joe comic. That should be a time long past. I also think it's absolutely, they had a good ending to Zartan's kind of character, having Storm Shadow kill him off in the silent issue by Paul Ryan that I talked about two or three G.I. Joe videos ago. They should have just ended him there. Having him come back less than 5 issues later it's just super, it just reads as super lazy to me. It's just not to me it's just not good writing, having him come back. And then, yeah, we're about to see the writing get, honestly, a bit worse. But yeah, this is just such an odd time in the G.I. Joe comic, because yeah, the artwork is actually pretty good. You saw it throughout the video. I think Mark Bright really brings a lot of classic artwork back to the comic, which is something that had been missing. You get your dynamic poses, you get your interesting angles, you get your clear character work. And yeah, but there's just a lot going on in the writing of the comic right now. You have Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow with the Red Ninja. That's an entirely useless subplot that's happening in all these comics. And that's also, and Snake Eyes had come back in the Tiger Force issue of the G.I. Joe comic, which I didn't talk about here on the channel because it's a terrible comic and I didn't want to read it again. But having this kind of be Snake Eyes' return to the G.I. Joe comic after quite a while of being absent, honestly, it just reads as odd to me. It's just such an odd choice. And yeah, because again, he's fighting the Red Ninja, but it's a Storm Shadow centric conflict, and the whole thing just reads as not very good. I don't know. I do like these issues. I think the idea of having Clutch and Rock and Roll be sleeper agents is a super interesting idea. I think showing some of the conflict and strife in the Cobra leadership, showing that they can't trust each other, and showing that Destro's trying to then the Destro knows that and they're just trying to counteract that. I think that's actually a really interesting direction for the comic to go. I just ultimately think that it's just a rough era for the G.I. Joe comic. It kind of feels like it's wandering in its identity. And yeah, because again, you're seeing these more character-centered issues, and there's no mission in these issues that the Joes are trying to accomplish. the Joes aren't acting as a unit for these issues, and that's how it's been for a while now. You know, you get your random, like, you get your small Joe teams that always feel kind of random. It'll be like Flint and 2 random Joes, or Roadblock and 2 random Joes. And like in this whole story, you notice the G.I. Joe unit isn't really present in any of these issues. Like they Clutch and Rock and Roll call them in for backup, but they're not. But it's not. It's just a different era of the G.I. Joe comic, and I don't think it's necessarily bad. I think the artwork's actually really good, like I was saying. But it's interesting because, yeah, they're easier to read when they have good art. I'll give them that. And then I think the next story is actually pretty good. Like, the next 2 are pretty good, I think. I just think overall the comics made some interesting choices in this era, and I don't quite know if they were good choices or not. The whole idea of having sleeper agents, it's a really interesting idea. It took, let's see, 1, 2, 3, took 5 issues to get that, like, one sentence that I just said. It took 5 issues to get the idea of that implemented. Not the actual, like, that's not start to end, that they're made sleeper agents and then, and like, they've betrayed the team and all that. That is literally just the amount of time it took to make them sleeper agents. Everything's just happening kind of slow in this comic right now. Like, this whole story, one of the issues in the middle of that is like separate. It's a one-off. So that's fine. That happens. But it still took 4 issues for Clutch and Rock and Roll to get captured and brainwashed, for Storm Shadow and Snake Eyes to wander into the woods and fight some ninja, and for Zartan to kill and replace the Blind Master. And all 4 of those plots are happening across all 4 of these issues. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. It just makes the comic a little hard to follow, because if you only care about one of those stories, then that could have been a single issue. You know what I mean? It didn't need to be 4. It didn't need to be carried out across 4 issues for all those stories. But I don't know. Overall, I like some of the character work in these issues. I like that they brought back Clutch and Rock and Roll, who were 2 of the more interesting Joes from the beginning from the early days of the comic. I like that they're sticking around. Obviously, you have Snake Eyes and Scarlet. You have Flint and Lady J very briefly in this story. Like, I think it is overall a good choice to have it be mostly focused around the established characters and kind of the ones who are better known, like that we the reader know more about and like have more of a connection with. I think that's overall a good choice. There's just something about like the writing on these issues that just doesn't click with me. And yeah, which is odd, because normally I actually think Larry Hama's writing on the G.I. Joe comics pretty good, especially in the early days. It was really good then. And yeah, to me, the whole G.I. Joe comic to me reads as like editorial problems stacked upon editorial problems. And like, I don't know. And that could just be me. That's just a theory that I have. I have no idea how true it is. I have no idea on anything. But at a certain point, it just felt like the editors stopped caring. But yeah, anyway, that's a whole long roundabout way to say, overall, I think these issues are good, but they're definitely not great. And I think they are one of the last. Mark Bright, I think, is one of the last good artists to work on G.I. Joe. And in the coming months, you're really gonna start to see the struggle that G.I. Joe has with its artwork. And I say it coming from, give it like 6 G.I. Joe videos, you'll see some rough artwork on the pages of the G.I. Joe comic. But anyway, that's borrowing problems from tomorrow. But anyway, all that to say, good issues, just not great. Yeah. Anyway. Well, I'm just another guy named James, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.